Hi folks, this is Jim at your Jiffy Customer Support Network. In this segment we're going to cover the proper procedure for changing the carburetor on the Jiffy Model Pro4 propane powered ice drill. Anytime that you're looking at doing repair work or replacing certain parts on the Jiffy Model Pro4 propane powered ice drill, you're going to want to take note that there are two different generation Pro4 units, and depending on the repair or the replacement, you're going to want to make sure that you identify which generation Pro4 model that you have. If you're replacing the carburetor, or if you're replacing the propane fuel delivery system, or changing out the throttle control, these are specific ones that there are different steps to completing the procedure for those replacements. So you're going to want to make sure that you identify the unit that you have. The two generation models are shown in the video here. The first unit on the right is the first generation, and it's identified by noting the aluminum fuel line that attaches the carburetor to the regulator, shown here in the video. Again, that's the first generation Pro4 model. The second generation Pro4 is shown here on the left, and the first thing you'll note, the absence of the aluminum fuel line, because the carburetor and the regulator are attached directly by this brass fitting. That's the major difference between the two models, but it does create specific differences in the steps taken in the procedure of replacing those particular parts. So you want to make sure you take note of that. Okay, the first step we're going to take in removing the throttle and cable assembly from the first generation Jiffy Model Pro4 is to go ahead and remove the throttle lever from the operator's handle. Again, this is located on the spark plug side of the unit. We'll just use a medium-sized Phillips screwdriver and just back that retention screw out of the handle until the throttle control lever comes loose. Kind of set that away to the side. And then the next step we're going to take is go ahead and remove the air cleaner assembly by first removing the air cleaner cover, then the air filter foam element, and then go ahead and remove the air cleaner backplate using a 5/16 nut driver to remove the retention nuts. Get the next one off here. So we'll go ahead and remove the retention clamp right away. Then we'll slide the air cleaner backplate off. We'll want to disassemble the breather tube from the air cleaner backplate. And at the same time, I want to note that there is a gasket that goes between the air cleaner backplate and the carburetor. We want to make sure that that's in place. It's a grayish color gasket. And then the next thing, we'll remove the fuel line from the carburetor by loosening the brass nut here. And we'll move that fuel line back out of the way, which then allows us to remove the carburetor and the throttle control cable and assembly. The next step we're going to want to take is remove the throttle wire from the throttle lever on the carburetor using needle nose pliers. Just slightly open the throttle up there and just slide that cable out of that pivot post. Whoops. And then next we'll just go ahead and loosen up the throttle cable from the mounting bracket on the side of the carburetor. And we'll just turn that carburetor off the end of the control cable. The first step in installing the new carburetor on the unit is to first of all replace the brass fitting that we took off the old carburetor. We want to make sure that we have our yellow plumber's tape on there, and make sure it's yellow because that's what's used for propane. And we'll just want to go ahead and screw that fitting back into the carb. And making sure that we've got it back in the same position that the other fitting was on the old carburetor. And then next we'll want to go ahead and reattach the throttle cable to the mounting bracket on the side of the carburetor by spinning that back on the threaded end. And once you see about one thread of the end of the throttle cable come through the top of the bracket, that's where you're going to want to stop turning it and then tighten up this jam nut. So that holds that in position. Then the next thing we want to do is go ahead and remount the throttle wire back to the pivot post on the throttle lever. We're going to want to note here that there's a ball on the end of that wire, and if you look at the pivot post that it mounts to, there's a larger opening in one end of that slot, and that's where this ball has to fit down into. So you want to make note of that and make sure that you get that back together properly. Get that back in position. Got that all remounted. Then we're going to want to go ahead and just remount the carburetor to the mounting studs. First we want to make sure that the gasket is in position. That goes between the adapter, carb adapter, and the carburetor. We'll go ahead and slide the carburetor back in position. Next we'll go ahead and reattach the aluminum fuel line to the carburetor. Tighten that up nice and snug. Then next we'll want to go ahead and remount the air cleaner backplate. First of all, we want to make sure that the gasket is in position that we talked about before, that goes between the backplate and the carburetor. Then we'll go ahead and reattach the breather tube to the back of the air cleaner backplate. We'll go ahead and slide the backplate back on. Then we'll want to remount the retention clamp. Then go ahead and remount the retention nuts on the mounting studs. Oops. And tighten those back up. Nice and snug. And we'll go ahead and replace the foam element back in position, and then the air cleaner cover back on. And then last we'll go ahead and remount the throttle lever to the operator control handle just by screwing in the retention screw until the throttle handle assembly snugs up tight against the operator handle. Now that we have everything reassembled, the next thing we want to just double check is to make sure that the throttle lever on the carburetor functions properly with the throttle on the handle, to make sure everything works freely and everything. On the Generation 1 Jiffy Model Pro4 propane powered ice drill, anytime that you work on the propane fuel system, whether it be the fuel line that attaches the carburetor to the regulator, or the carburetor itself, or the fuel delivery system, which includes the regulator and the hose, once you have everything reassembled, you want to make sure that you perform what's called a leak test. A leak test is performed by using a water-soap mixture along with a brush that you brush over the various fittings after you've got it reassembled, and then If you see any bubbles form, that's evidence of a leak. And the thing you'll want to do is retighten those fittings that leak and then re-perform the leak test until you make sure you have no bubbles. And that basically concludes the proper procedure for changing the carburetor on the Generation 1 Jiffy model Pro4. If anyone has any questions or concerns regarding this procedure, please feel free to contact us anytime at the 2 locations noted on the screen. I'd like to take this time to thank you for your continued support of Jiffy products and also the purchase of your Jiffy ice drill. Thanks and have a great day.